Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live broadcast from Lengthsman's Cottage. We are here on this Landmark Trust property by Ned's Lock, which is Lock 31 on the Stratford Canal. As you can see, we're in socially distanced deck chairs. I have Jo Bell with me here. Absolutely delighted to have you here today. And yeah, as is the way these days, we're here a couple of meters apart. Hello.
Hello!
It feels like a proper festival because we have had all sorts of weathers here today. We have brollies here at the ready, just in case the weather turns. But yeah, the heavens have opened on us. We've had wildlife interventions, we've had human interventions, but we've had a great time here today. We've actually been recording some poetry and some prose with Jo, which we will edit together and then make available on our website in due course. But in the meantime, we're really grateful that Jo has agreed to do this live session with us, where she will read some of her wonderful poems. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please leave them in the chat, not in the Q&A, because I can't actually see the Q&A. So please leave them in the chat and we will pick them up at the end of the readings. But yeah, without further ado, Jo Bell, wonderful poet, producer, and supporter of the spoken word.
Yes, I think so, and lover of canals as well.
And
so
lover of canals,
thank you for having me
so
here at the Lengthsman's Cottage at Lowsonford. And I used to live down here when I was first working with narrowboats, with historic boats. I used to live down here in Warwickshire. So it's very, very nice to be back in this fantastic spot. And because we're being socially distant and practicing everything properly, I got to stay all on my own in this cottage last night, which was the first time I've been away from home in a year. It was too exciting. But one of the reasons this place means something to me is that Tom Rolt mentions it in his anthemic book, Narrowboat, which was the book that really started the revival of the canal movement. And he says, "I know of no better place in which to spend a summer's day than this green heart of England, the Vale of Avon." And he's right, although it's also a very nice place in which to spend a torrential spring day with a bit of rain, a bit of hail. We have really had everything today. So I thought I'd start the poems with one which is about rain and what happens after rain. And I've written it out so that I don't have to bring my computer out into a hailstorm. It's called One Naturally Walked Softly and Give Stricken. Here, the very ground is changed by rain. Red tracks ribboning through stands of birch. The field oaks drenched. Between the cabbages, it's havoc. Beetles go to pieces. Thrushes bounce to take the day's next snail. After its grand soak, the land shakes its coat, gives off a spice of bracken, sets the birdsong going where it left off. Air takes stock and finds itself refreshed. In the gutters, chalk shines out like knuckles. The earth is thundersweet. At times like this, I like to look at my feet. And I found as I looked at canal poems, I'm not going to read entirely canal poems today, but as I looked at what I wanted to read, a lot of the poems are about birds. A lot of the things I've written recently are about birds. And here in particular, the bird song is amazing. It's early spring, they're going crazy in the hedgerows. And so I was going to read you a little poem called Roitelet, which is the French name for, I think it's goldfinches, but someone will tell me if I'm wrong. And just for their mindfulness, which is a much abused word. Out here, the little kings are in the bushes, clods of pomp about their ministries of twig and berry, bothering the grubs. Nest fettlers below them in the hierarchy of thorns, hectic in their now. Fetch and carry, hither and yon. Pip, 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 they say. Today, today, today. And that's all they say really, the birds. Another nice thing about being at Lowsonford is that if the world were as it should be, we would have at least once been into the Fleur de Lis, which is just across the canal, one of the nicest pubs in this part of the world. And that reminded me of a poem I wrote some time ago called Desiderata. And Desiderata just means wish list. Many of you will know that Max Ehrmann poem, which goes, "Go placidly amid the noise and haste." Well, that's what he wants. What I want is this. I tell you this, there's nothing finer than a pub by water. In fact, there's nothing finer than a pub by a canal, which should be peopled by the friends who've just tied up and stepped from boat to bar. The pub, ideally, will be called the Navigation. The friends will be quite capable of splicing ropes, of floating, and of remaining upright as they near the bank. At any rate, the beer will certainly be speckled hen. The Navigation will be pleasingly old-fashioned, with a beer garden which overlooks the water, a Wendy house in which to lock the children, and a menu which includes steak pie. The canal, of course, is the important part. It is the one you always meant to do, but never did. Its bridges small, its channel deep, its banks a mass of elderflower and bramble, not an angler to be seen. The passing boats all slowing to a well-considered crawl. A little muddy path, which leads off to a pub by water. And we are right by the canal, as you can hear. If you're feeling the urge to go to the toilet, that's probably because you can hear running water. And you may occasionally hear a little beep as someone goes over the humpbacked canal bridge behind us to warn other traffic that they're coming on. So the birds that you can hear are not the bird that the next poem is about, which is called Hernshaw. And the Hernshaw, by a name that you will know differently, is one of the greatest sights on the canals. It's our largest English bird. Go away, or stay. At any rate, don't talk. My name was Hunger in the egg. My name was Fligger, Ironceau, Hansa, Handsaw, Hernshaw. I will stand one ankle at a time in this rich stream, a miser, ankle deep in currency. The idiot geese may shout and squander strength on flight, but when I move, I mean it. I will take a frog for softness, a water rail mid-sharm, drown a half-sharp duckling. Given less than half a chance, I'll tweeze a rabbit kitten by the ear and neck it. 80 days ago, I was an egg. Now, a yard of hollow bone and feather. Nothing you can say will interest me. A name's a stake that pegs you to the riverbank. My name is River King. My name is irrelevant. The river is enough. It's a heron, obviously it's a heron. And when, is it Hamlet says, I can tell a hawk from a handsaw, he's talking about a heron. He knows the difference between a heron and a hawk, as I hope we all do. So a few more canal poems. This one is called No Seafarer, and it starts from an Anglo-Saxon poem called The Seafarer, which is plainly written by a sailor, plainly written by a man who knows how to handle a seagoing boat. And the contrast with my life on narrowboats struck me. So I borrowed his first line, I stole his first line and took it from there. I sing my own true story, tell my travels, small as they are, of episodes on shallow channels, working up to Wolverhampton through the 21, or drifting into Diglis, gagging for a cup of tea. It's all about me, my boat, my slow-mo marvels, my lockside affairs, a spaniel saved from death, a wisecrack for the fat gongoozler, that day on the Llangollen, storm-glazed, glad together. The overgrowing straits that carry me from one pub to the next, the river mouths and long dead ferry points where knackered boats would carry sheep across at dusk. I sing their praises daily, bank to bank. A narrow span, a slight adventure of slight travels, yes, but still my own, and true, and still, for all that, sung. It strikes me sometimes as I read some of these poems how they've changed meaning. Everything has changed meaning, hasn't it, in the past year? And that some of these poems, which were meant to celebrate small travel, the freedom of going a short distance as well as a great distance, are all the more meaningful now because the freedom to travel any distance at all is something we can no longer take for granted. But the poem I have to read, because we're right next to a lock here, is Lifted, which kind of gives you an instruction on how to work a narrow lock, and is about that ubiquitous canal experience. The land says, come uphill, and water says, I will, but take it slow. A workman's ask, and nothing fancy, will you? Here's an answer, engineered. A leisurely machine, a box of oak and stone, the mitred lock, the waters, yes. We're stopped. The bow bumps softly at the bottom gate and drifts. All water wants, all water ever wants, is to fall. So we use the fall to lift us, make of water its own tool, as simple as a crowbar or a well-tied knot. Open up the paddles, let it dam and pucker, lift, and with it lift us, like a bride, a kite, a wanted answer, breath no longer held, or like a boat. We're on our way and rising. Water rushes in like fools. These tonnages that slip across the sill, all dirty bottle green and gathering into a giddy hurl. Then slower, slow, until it ends in glassy bulges, hints of aftermath, a cool and thorough spending. Wait then for the shudder in the gate, the backward drifting boat that tells you there and here are equal, an imbalance righted. Ask of water, help me rise. And water says, I will. I first came to this part of the world as an archaeologist, which is what I used to do, tasked with looking after 10 historic narrowboats, which were classed at that time as large artifacts, very large artifacts. And that got me thinking about what kind of archaeologist I was. We all specialise in different things. So some specialise in the archaeology of sports stadiums. And I was the archaeologist of rivers. We study the forsaken, which after all is commonplace. We have our specialties, Etruscan earthenware or Saxon jewellery. Each action leaves its spoor. We call this material culture. You call it spoons. My own field is the archaeology of water, the ditches cut and filled, the softening wharves. I take the measure of the footprint left in shifting things from making place to marketplace. Armaments, immigrants, bricks and food, or earthenware and jewellery, as the century requires. The slow machine that England was is stamped on every bulrush boatyard, on the lock gate knocking home. I tread from sluice to mill race, give each one its small place in the record. The worked stone on the bank, wet as an eye, every channel filling as I pass. that sense of living in a monument which is filling constantly with water is common to anyone who knows what it is to look out of a narrowboat window in the morning, and to be part of something which is so monumental and permanent, but so transient and changing all the time. And another birding poem, I was going to say, bird song poem. Bird song at the wreck. If you grew up like me in a kind of northern village, the wreck is where you would meet to do illicit things at night. There you are. That's an authentic canal noise. Bird song at the wreck. I only know the ones that sound like muesli, speckling the day with goodness. The ones that sound like rusty swings or a musical saw, the bomb going off, the torturer's knock at the door, the car park birds, the lay-by birds of verge and brink. These I know. I like the ones that sound like schnapps with gold leaf spinning in it. I like the day's last blackbird, holding up its song, a candle flame as the street lights flicker on. I hope that you can hear us properly and see us properly without delay. We have the excellent Tim and Will here helping us in technical terms to make it all happen. And we all know a little bit more about how to do all this stuff, don't we? We've all become a little more technological in the past year. But some things never change, and one of them is the coming of spring, this time of year which is sometimes cold and sometimes sunny and sometimes everything at once. This is a poem called February the 21st, which is not entirely about spring. Not the first morning after, but the second, I notice wax green crocus spikes beside the path. Your house is sharp with sun. Behind the car, the dry stone walls are soft with moss, upholstering the northern light into the lime. Still warm with given touch, I slip the brake and pull away across the Livenet's little bridge into the uplands. The day is mine to claim. A rook lifts from the white-green fell, blown and gladly battered, flailing with joy. Your gate needs oiling, by the way. Even that I like. So that takes us to birds again and rooks, and a little poem from a time when I lived in Wiltshire, very near Avebury, the great stone circle at Avebury, and it was an extraordinary place in a different way to this, very characteristic but very different. There must have been a score of them, all lift and dip and fluster, beak and feather against half-formed clouds, grey bonnet winds. The circled stones lay under them unnoticed, and none of our paths relevant to their high view. They flew, it seemed, without direction, but they flew. I'm going to give you two more, which again are changing in these times. This takes its name from the hymn, I will lift up mine eyes to the hills. So probably this should be for my mum, who is a great singer, and a singer of hymns originally, I think. We make our own winters. Take the valley or the ridge, depending on conditions, says the book. The hills are locked in snow, and I will walk from Mount Or, shivering, to Barker Bank. The views are clear and treacherous. The sky an unstoppable blue. Either road, the land will carry me unnoticed as the river bears a boat. I'll walk the ridge today. I'll take my kite. So I'm going to finish with a poem from the same series as the one that I began with, which take their titles from the writings of the naturalist John Muir, whose titles are poems in themselves, really, his little phrases. Go quietly and alone no harm will befall you. And this one I'm reading for all of us and any of us who have suffered isolation or sadness this year. Sometimes, thin-skinned and sickening for stars, you bolt for wildness. A mountain range, a precipice, or ordinary river, quoits of light in pools. You'll find your clearing, far from words and walls. The sky supports your every breath, unwastable. When you are old, no one will know how often you were struck by lightning. What's given is enough. Allow yourself this moment of bewilderment, wild but not unsafe, a storm of appetite for colour that wrecks the plains, reducing everything to love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. What a perfect way to end the week and start the weekend. And that last poem in particular was one that I've known of yours for many years, and I remember sharing it on Twitter probably many years ago now. And when I thought of inviting you back here, I thought I must ask Jo to do that, because I think it's just so meaningful for now. It just resonates in so many different ways. And so many of us have turned to poetry during this last year. So many discussions that you have with friends revolve around poems that we've read, which I think is absolutely wonderful. But you mentioned that you were an archaeologist first. So how does an archaeologist with a keen eye turn into a poet and writer? What was that progression for you?
It's the same skill. The keen eye is the key to it. And thank you, by the way, for the kind words. But people sometimes say, how could you go from one to the other when they're so different? And to me, they're exactly the same thing. It's a search for meaning. You're looking for the meaning below the surface, and not to be trite about it. It is like a process of excavation. So when you sit down to write, you're thinking, well, here's the surface thing. Here's the canal. Here's the weather. Here's the bird song. But what does it mean? What does it mean to us daily? For instance, why does a blackbird singing on the telegraph pole as you go to bed, why does that touch you so deeply? And you have to uncover it a little bit. And the other skill that's the same, that is common to both, is in archaeology we were always told, record what you see, not what you expect to see. So if you expect to see the line of a wall, you will see it there, when in fact there's something much more interesting happening over here as you excavate. And in poetry, it's often the same. If you write about the death of your father, woe is me, I am so sad. And that may be true, of course, but actually the important thing that you want to write about that day might be the fact that you have a bunion and that this small pain is bothering you more than your grief, and that's a common human experience. So uncovering is, I guess, the theme to both. But in terms of process, the canal was key to it. I got this job looking after historic canal boats. I went native and ended up buying a boat. And it was not by mistake or coincidence that I ended up becoming more and more involved with poetry as I did that. The freedom of that life and the freedom of creative writing came together, I think.
Fascinating. I can totally see that connection between the two. It makes perfect sense.
Good.
So we first met you here in 2015 when the Landmark Trust was celebrating its 50th anniversary, and at that point we had a Gormley statue pretty much exactly in front of where I'm sat now. And we were here with members of staff from the Canal and Rivers Trust, and we had a big celebration, and it was very much a joint event, which was really lovely. And at that time, you were the Canal Laureate.
Canal Laureate. I was just outgoing. Oh, and Kerry Andrew was here as well. Fantastic composer and musician, and now novelist, who has a novel out called Swan. Is it Swan Song?
Swan Song. Yeah.
And I was presented on that very day with a bronze mooring pin with my name on it, which I think is unique, and is now under my sofa bed because I don't want to use it to moor anywhere. Yeah, so I was Canal Laureate. The Canal and Rivers Trust was formed as a replacement for British Waterways in 2012. And they wanted to signal that they were doing something different and that their approach was going to be different and a bit less quango and a bit more creative. So they asked me to be Canal Laureate, and I said, what does that mean? And they said, we don't know, we've never had one before. So we kind of invented it as we went along. And one of the things was performing here. I've had a poem put in a lock gate in Huddersfield as part of a separate project. And did lots of workshops and events at canal sides to just encourage people who wouldn't normally come down to the canal, I think, to do that. And of course, in this year, more people have come down to the canal than ever because it's been the space in their own landscape that's always been there and that has been underused, and that people are now walking their dogs and visiting. It's magic.
And what did you learn about canals during that period as Canal Laureate that you didn't already know, or that you didn't already think you know? What did you uncover about yourself and about your relationship?
I think maybe just acknowledging that it is a sort of spiritual thing, that we are British and we don't easily talk about these dimensions of life, but that the people who live on water or by water, the people who have a close relationship with the canal, have a particular reverence might be the wrong word, but certainly a particular affection, a particular love for it. It's not a glamorous monument, this. It's a vernacular, working class, industrial environment which has been relatively little faffed about with. It's still working, thanks to the revival, thanks to the work of people like the IWA and various other bodies. But it's not posh. No. It's just itself.
And one thing I didn't mention in the introduction is the reason this is called Ned's Lock is after the gentleman who lived here for pretty much all his life. He was 83 years. We double checked the history album earlier. And his father had lived here before. And so Ned is synonymous with this spot that we are in. And in fact, it's Ned's niece who still helps us to look after this property when it's obviously open to guests. So yeah, the canal is full of people with just wonderful life stories, yeah, and wonderful characters.
I think that's a better answer to your question, actually, that really it's about a connection to place in the way that's become psychogeography now. I guess people call it psychogeography, and the works of Robert Macfarlane and Ian Sinclair and Nan Shepherd and others have made people more aware of what it means to them to simply put one foot in front of the other in the place where they live. And the canal is within reach of almost everyone, certainly in England. In the north or the Midlands of England, you are near a canal. And it's such a ordinary place and magical at the same time.
Many apologies, everyone. Technology has failed us, I'm afraid. I can't actually access the chat via the other phone. So I hope I'm answering some of the questions, or I'm asking Jo some of the questions that you may have had up your sleeves. Because unfortunately I can't access the questions you might be leaving.
Probably so someone's asked, is it cold in the winter? That's what they normally say.
Go on then. Is it cold in the winter on a narrowboat? Living on a narrowboat?
Carry on. No, not as long as you light the fire. Carry on.
Excellent. Excellent. That's good. Short answer to that one. So obviously we've been through the weirdest year in all of our lives, probably. And it's not over yet. That's the thing. We're all just coming out of things slowly. And yeah, it's very curious sort of actually being on the canal when it's this quiet, because normally this little stretch of water is so busy. But what have you been doing during lockdown? How have you occupied yourself? How's it changed you? Where's life taken you?
It's been a lot more local, because my working life normally takes me up and down the country and doing gigs in Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire and Scotland and everywhere else. So I spent a lot less time on trains, no time at all on trains. I spent a lot more time in my pajamas, like everyone else in the world. And in some ways, that's been fine. You know, in my working life, all the things that I would normally do that involve standing up in front of an audience disappeared on day one. I don't do those anymore. But new things happened. So I ran a poetry group called Try to Praise the Mutilated World, which got hundreds and hundreds of members, almost 400 members on Facebook.
Now that's a poem by
Adam Zagajewski, who has just left the building. He just died this week.
That's a gorgeous poem.
It's a beautiful poem. And one that I recommend to anyone who wants a bit of uplift. Try to Praise the Mutilated World, it's called. And that's what we did. We were unable to be together, but we were suddenly able to be in a global group with 400 and odd members, sharing our most intimate thought processes together and being very open with one another. The other thing is that this technology, which we're all familiar with now by necessity, has shown me how many people I was excluding from gigs in the past. That, you know, of course, young mothers with toddlers can't make it out to gigs in the evening. Of course, I knew that people in wheelchairs or people with certain access needs or people who don't like driving in the dark would not be happy coming to evening gigs, but so many people are excluded. And now we've learned, in fact, it may be dangerous. We've learned that we can sit at home with a glass of wine in our pajamas. We never need to leave the house again. We can just go to things on Zoom forever. So I do hope that at some point someone will come and see us live. So that's been the big change to my work environment. But in terms of what I've done a lot of yoga. I've done a lot of gardening. I've spent a lot of time with my partner and not killed him, and he hasn't killed me. These are all achievements I hadn't expected to have a year ago, you know.
Yeah.
If you'd asked me a year ago, will you still both be alive? I would have said, oh, I wouldn't have thought so. No, one of us will have throttled the other.
I think that is, you are seeing the same person day in, day out. I was watching Grayson Perry's Art Club once. It's the only time I've watched it, but there was one young girl who'd done a picture with just multiple drawings of her boyfriend. I think it was called Jamie, and she said, well, that's all I see now is just Jamie, Jamie, Jamie. Just like, yeah.
Unfortunately,
yeah, we're all in that kind of like, oh, you again. But I love you, and that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know if you found the same thing, but what I've seen a lot more of is my own neighbourhood. That I live on the edge of the Peak District, at the Peak Park, and I kept formally going elsewhere for walking weekends. And I've spent so much time walking with my dear bubble friends in the vicinity of Macclesfield, where I live. Just walking up the back lanes, walking around the allotments, walking around the local parks. And it forces on you a precision, a way of looking, which is very poetic, actually. So without wanting to sound too metaphysical about it, that's a big deal, you know, to look at where you live more closely is a gift.
And to see it changing.
Yeah.
I mean, last spring was just glorious, just being able to sit in the garden and actually just watch leaves unfurling and flowers and observe the birds feeding. You know, having that time to do that, it was like some kind of cruel gift, because you knew that at the same time awful things were happening, but someone had given you something to help you through that, which was extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a gift none of us wanted. But I think the working environment may change significantly after this, because people who had formerly just taken it for granted that you have to go to work 9 to 5, you have to spend a great deal of time traveling, might have been forced to value that slowness a bit more, and to spend more time with their own children, for instance. You know, I know a lot of blokes who spent a lot of time with their kids that they would never have had the chance to do otherwise. So yeah, it's a disaster with great side effects for some people. Yeah, you know.
So one more question before we go. Although the sun is out, so I could quite happily sit here for the rest of the afternoon now. So by all means, someone pull the plug if we get boring. One more question. you mentioned the thing about Zoom and performing your poetry, and we were talking earlier when we were sat inside watching the rain outside about what it means now. You hear this terminology, the spoken word poet or spoken word performer. Do you see yourself as that? And is that what poetry always was, or is that a new thing for poetry, for poets to be performers as well, so, as opposed to something that you pick off a shelf or read in the classroom? Or
I think it's the oldest form of poetry. It's poetry arose as a way of remembering a long story. If it rhymes, or if it has more commonly a strong rhythm or a pattern of sounds, you're going to remember the story of Beowulf or any other story, the story of the Odyssey, so that you can tell it again and again and again and again. And at some point somebody writes it down and it becomes fixed. But the story and the sounds it makes were always poems to begin with. And that language of poetry and song is closely related. That's never, ever gone away. That element of poetry has gone away. There's been a divergence between the poetry that we now call spoken word, which is kind of vernacular, if you like, folk poetry, which is not to say that it's simple or foolish poetry at all. It's just a different strand of tradition, that it has more emphasis often on sound. It has more emphasis necessarily on the impact it makes to a live audience. On the one hand, you've got that. And on the other hand, you've got the more page-based poetry, literary poetry, which might be a more slow-burning kind of mechanical piece of writing that people will have the opportunity to read 2 or 3 or 52 times and digest differently each time. And there's nothing really contradictory about the two. They're two different kinds of music. And, you know, we were saying earlier on, nobody says that folk music isn't music because classical music exists. It's just a different tradition. I can't stand jazz. I can't stand opera, but I quite like folk music. You know, it doesn't mean that jazz isn't music, although that's debatable, you know. Does that answer your question?
That that's brilliant, thank you. And so do you see yourself as a spoken word poet, or
really?
do you write for performing, or do you write for the page?
It's a good question. I do both, and I'm conscious that I write. I mean, some of the pieces I've read today and the pieces that we recorded earlier on, which I think are going to be made accessible later, some of those have been written with the ear in mind, if you like. So I wrote a thing for Radio 4 a few years ago called Slow Machine, which included lots of more pronounced rhymes and sounds, because the music of the piece was more important. It was a thing that people would only hear once. But some of the poems in my book, for instance, Kith, are a little more subtle in the machinery, if you like, so that you won't get an immediate hit from them, but they might come back to you in the bath. That's nice. The thought that somebody might think of one of my lines in the bath would be quite nice. So I wouldn't call myself a spoken word poet, but it's a distinction really that only poets care about, really. I certainly speak my words, I certainly perform them. So really all that matters is it's poetry, and if you like it, you like it, and if you don't like it, that's fine as well. There's no compulsion for people with brains to like poetry. That sort of thing was beaten into us at school, and we can let it go now. But if you've been watching this, you probably do.
Quite. Hold up your books.
Oh, okay.
So this is what Joe's been reading from, but this
is the one you can't get anymore, except on Kindle, where I've formatted it so badly that the contents page is 20 pages long. This is the one that you can get from a nice, decent publisher called Nine Arches Press, and it's called Kith. And there is in the offing a canal memoir, provisionally called Boater, and you will hear more of that, a great deal more at great length, when it's a little bit closer to the shelves.
Yeah, we look forward to that. I heard some excerpts from that today, and it sounds absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
So thank you for spending the day with us here in all weathers. And I'd also really like to thank Tim and Will from As You See It Media, who've done all the technological wizardry for us today. Been running around like headless chickens, avoiding the weather, and captured some absolutely brilliant footage. So thank you. Thank you to the Canal and Rivers Trust, who've let us stray onto the towpath today and film kind of within the vicinity of this area. It's so beautiful, and they do such a marvellous job of looking after our canals and waterways. And thank you to also to Landmark for all the work that all our staff do, particularly looking after this property. We met Sam the decorator today, didn't we?
Yeah. You said he was entertaining, and he was.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. So it's
you
all
look
been
very
happening.
trim for 53. He said. Thanks.
So yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam, for looking after the property.
Yes. And Chaz.
Yeah, and Chaz the sidekick. So yeah, we will leave you there to enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope you have a lovely weekend. And yes, the sun is now shining, which is just absolutely perfect. So thank you everyone for joining us, and goodbye.